WHO, that's the World Health Organization, and they were wrong. They've been wrong about a lot of things. And they had a lot of information early, and they didn't want to, they seemed to be very China-centric. They called it wrong. They called it wrong. They missed the call. They could have called it months earlier. They would have known. And they should have known, and they probably did know. So we'll be looking into that very carefully.
Ideally, it should be the WHO's response that should dominate the news. But it's Dr. Ghebreyesus who is in the headlines, and that too for all the wrong reasons. The Wuhan coronavirus is now a pandemic. It did not have to be. Almost 1 million people have been infected by it. The number could have been much smaller. The virus could have been stopped had China taken timely action instead of orchestrating a cover-up. China failed to contain the Wuhan virus. The world is paying the price for it now. Where does the WHO Director General come in the picture? He had a role which he did not fulfill. And now there is a big question mark over his credibility. Since the beginning of this outbreak, he has defended China. Not just defended, he even praised China. Is he blind to China's follies? Or is he turning a blind eye to China's actions? The whole world can see China's lapses, but the man who heads the World Health Organization says this in China's defense.
During my visit to Beijing last week, I was so impressed in my meeting with President Xi at his detailed knowledge of the outbreak and for his personal leadership, but also at his commitment from the words he told me I will share with you. We will take serious measures at the epicenter, at the source, in order to protect our people and also to prevent the spread of the virus to other countries.
Impressed, he says, by the personal leadership and commitment of the Chinese leader. And he said this in February. And with each such statement, his credibility and that of his organization takes a beating. The WHO is now being called the Wuhan Health Organization. I'm sure they're aware of how they're being slammed the world over, and yet they do not course correct. Do you wonder why? We dug into his past to look for the answers, and we stumbled on a very interesting story. Listen to this. He's called Dr. Ghebreyesus, but he does not have a degree in medicine. He has a PhD in community health. So how did he become the WHO Director General? His appointment, in fact, any DG's appointment, is made through an election. And Dr. Ghebreyesus ran a successful campaign to get this job. He had powerful backers, no prizes for guessing who. The Chinese were backing him from the very beginning, and this is a matter of record.
Instead, the WHO is a corrupt mess from top to bottom. The current Director General of the World Health Organization is a man called Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. He was previously the health minister of Ethiopia. Now, politically, Tedros was a member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. That's a Marxist-Leninist Ethiopian political party. It's part of the coalition ruling Ethiopia as a repressive authoritarian state. After taking control of the World Health Organization, Tedros promptly tried to appoint Robert Mugabe, the murderous dictator of Zimbabwe, as an international goodwill ambassador for public health, if you can believe that. Tedros delivered a speech praising Zimbabwe as, quote, a country that places universal health coverage and health promotion at the center of its policies to provide health care to all, end quote. Now, that's lunatic. But bad politics aside, Tedros has endangered human lives, which is a weird resume point for a man running a World Health Organization. As health minister in Ethiopia, on 3 separate occasions, Tedros covered up cholera outbreaks in the south of the country. To downplay the outbreaks and protect Ethiopia's reputation, Tedros each time insisted that they were simply rashes of, quote, acute watery diarrhea. According to media reports, Ethiopian officials pressured aid agencies to cover up the truth about what was happening and hide the number of people affected. As soon as the disease spread to neighboring countries, it was obvious that it was cholera and identified as such. If Tedros had told the truth at the time, which he did not, lives could have been saved. This is the man running the World Health Organization at the beginnings of a global epidemic.
And I'd like to also explain that I filed the complaint in the first place because I was an early advisor to Ethiopia's opposition to the TPLF beginning in 1991 with Dr. Asrat Waldeas. And in that role, I had 27 years in which to study and observe the TPLF. And I saw, of course, that it was routinely committing genocide and atrocities, and nobody in power certainly seemed to care. And it was very frustrating. And in the course of that observation, in the latter years of the regime, I observed the rise to power and influence of Dr. Tedros. And I saw that from 2012, he actually came into power in the latter part, the end of 2012. So effectively from 2013 to 2016, he was the smiling public face of this murderous dictatorship. And as its third highest official and a member of the all-powerful TPLF Politburo or Executive Committee, he was a very important decision maker who was so much a part of the system that he must be responsible for the actions of the government's security forces. And as I said, he was too much a part of that system to pretend that he had nothing to do with all the crimes. He facilitated and protected the widespread and systematic pattern of ethnic and politically targeted crimes begun by his predecessors. So he never spoke out once, excuse me. He never spoke out, he never resigned, while his subordinates routinely murdered students, journalists, and nonviolent democracy activists, including many children. He kept silent while TPLF proxies put political prisoners in cells with wild animals. He knew that millions of people were suffering and dying because critical life-saving public goods were denied them because of their ethnicity or political affiliation. He knew that his colleagues were siphoning billions out of the economy, needed to save lives, yet he did nothing. So it was with a great deal of frustration and disappointment that I, and especially millions of Ethiopians, to whose fear, grief, and injury Tedros so contributed, watched him be honored in 2017 with his election to lead the WHO. I watched the WHO member states as well as celebrities publicly praise him. And what they were doing was sweeping his Ethiopian victims under the rug as if their pain and their lives were unimportant. I watched the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I wondered where was the outrage over the much greater number of Black victims for whom Tedros shares accountability. So this complaint or communication was essentially filed to establish that Ethiopian lives matter too.
So how did this man, who seems not just unqualified, but seems to have the kind of background that would make him exactly the wrong person to run the World Health Organization, how did he get this job?
you.